The pounding of hooves along the dry trail stopped with a jolt as Rose Carver's sharp cry ripped through the late-day heat. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. The wagon had pitched violently, hurling her from the seat and into the shadow of its own collapse. Moments earlier, she'd been scanning the wide Montana horizon for any sign of Willow Creek, her promised new beginning. Now she lay pinned beneath her scattered possessions, the heavy wooden frame crushing her chest until each breath came ragged and thin. "Help," Rose's voice cracked with panic. "Somebody, please!" The endless prairie of 1878 swallowed her plea. Golden grasslands stretched for miles under a pale sky, with the far-off Rockies drawn in hazy blue. She cursed her own stubbornness. Traveling alone after her father's death had seemed her only choice, the teaching job in Willow Creek, her one way out of Boston's ghosts. Dust choked her lungs as the wagon's weight bore down harder. Was this how her story would end, alone in this breathtaking, merciless land? Black spots edged her vision when the drumming of another horse cut through the roar in her ears. A sudden shadow blotted out the sun. "Don't move, ma'am," a deep voice commanded. "I'll get you free." Through the blur, she caught a glimpse of broad shoulders and a set jaw before the stranger planted his boots beside the overturned rig. With a low grunt, he heaved upward, muscles straining under a sweat-damp work shirt. The pressure on her chest eased. "Crawl," he urged through clenched teeth. "Now, while I've got it." Summoning every shred of strength, Rose dragged herself forward inch by inch, skirts snagging on splintered boards. She had just cleared the wreck when the wagon slammed back down with a bone-shaking crash. Her rescuer straightened chest, heaving his face streaked with trail dust. From battered boots to sweat-stained hat, he was every inch a frontier cowboy. "Thank you," Rose whispered, still fighting for breath. He crouched beside her, concern softening his rugged features. "Are you hurt? I don't think so," she managed, though her body throbbed in protest as she tried to sit up. "Just bruised." "Name's Gage Hollis," he said, steadying her with a calloused but gentle hand. "Most folks just call me Gage." "Rose Carver," she replied, finally, seeing him clearly. Storm-blue eyes, a strong jaw roughened by days on the trail, a steadiness that invited trust. "Where were you headed?" Miss Carver, Gage asked, surveying the wreck. One wheel had sheared off entirely, her belongings strewn across the dirt. "Willow Creek," she said, despair tightening her chest. "I'm to be the new schoolteacher." A flicker of recognition crossed his face. "That's a stroke of luck. I'm bound that way myself. Our ranch lies about 5 miles east of town, the Hollis Ranch." "You mean the ranch from the town council's letters?" Rose asked. He nodded with a ghost of a smile. "My father's place. I run it with my brothers, but we'd better gather what we can and move on. Nightfall's quick out here, and we've still got a long ride ahead." Rose looked at the broken wagon, reality sinking in. "But my wagon." "No fixing that here," Gage said kindly. "We'll pack what fits on my horse. I'll send men back for the rest once you're safe." Tears stung her eyes, but she blinked them away. She hadn't wept when she buried her father 3 months earlier. She wouldn't start over a shattered wagon. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Hollis." "Gage," he corrected gently, offering his hand. Anyone would lend a hand. Pain shot through her ankle as she stood, and she faltered. Gage caught her effortlessly, his grip firm at her waist. "You are hurt," he said, brow furrowing. "It's nothing," Rose insisted, though she couldn't bear weight on the foot. Without argument, he scooped her into his arms and carried her to a flat slab of rock. "Sit. Let me check." Too startled to protest, Rose let him kneel and examine the swelling joint. His rough hands were unexpectedly careful. "Sprained, not broken," he concluded. "But you won't walk far on it." "I can manage," she began, but Gage was already striding back to the wreck. First things first, he called over his shoulder. What do you absolutely need? For the next hour, they worked together, Gage doing the heavy lifting while Rose, perched on her stone seat, pointed out essentials. Books, clothes, teaching supplies were packed into neat bundles and strapped to the saddle of his tall chestnut stallion, who watched with calm, almost amused patience. When Gage secured the final bundle, Rose hobbled closer, leaning on a sturdy branch he'd fashioned into a walking stick. "Where do I sit?" she asked, eyeing the powerful horse with doubt. The animal looked even taller up close, its withers towering well over her head. Gage Hollis studied Rose Carver, then the horse burdened with their bundles. "Ride with me," he said simply, as if it were the most natural plan in the world. Before Rose could think of a protest, he lifted her onto the saddle and swung up behind her in one smooth, practiced motion. Her breath caught as his arms came around her to take the reins. Back in Boston, such closeness to a man outside family would have been shocking. But with the wide wilderness closing in and twilight coming fast, it felt purely sensible. Even so, she couldn't ignore the solid warmth of him at her back, or the faint brush of his breath on the loose strands of her hair. "Comfortable?" Gage asked, his voice low beside her ear. "Yes." "Thank you," she answered, glad he couldn't see the color rising in her cheeks. "There's a good campsite about an hour's ride," he explained, as the horse moved off at an easy lope. "Fresh water, a stand of cottonwoods to break the wind. We'll head into town at first light." The reality of spending a night out here with a man she'd only just met suddenly struck her. As if sensing the tension, he added gently, "Don't worry, Miss Carver. You're safe with me. I give you my word." Strangely, Rose believed him. Something steady and sure lived in Gage Hollis, from the calm way he guided the horse to the respectful space he kept, even as their shoulders brushed with each sway of the saddle. He began pointing out landmarks and telling stories of the territory. Born and raised in these parts, he said, the middle of 5 brothers. After the war, his father had staked a claim, and with grit and years of work built one of the largest ranches in Montana Territory. And your mother, Rose, asked, relaxing little by little, as the steady rhythm of the ride eased her mind. A pause. "Passed when I was 14. Fever took her and my youngest brother the same winter." "I'm sorry," Rose said softly. "I lost my mother young as well, and my father just this past winter." Gage's arms tightened briefly around her, an instinctive gesture of comfort. "That's a heavy road to walk alone." "That's why I headed west," she admitted. "Boston is full of memories I couldn't bear anymore." They rode on in companionable quiet as the sun sank and washed the prairie in copper and gold. Despite the ache in her ankle and the uncertainty ahead, Rose felt a peace she hadn't known in months, maybe since her father died. When they reached the campsite, Gage had in mind she saw why he'd chosen it, a clear creek running over smooth stones and a grove of cottonwoods standing like quiet sentries. He dismounted first and turned to help her down, his big hand spanning her waist with effortless strength. "Let that ankle rest," he said, settling her on a fallen log. "I'll get a fire going." Rose watched as he worked unpacking gear, gathering wood, striking flint. Every move was sure and economical, a man born to the open country. Soon a small blaze danced cheerfully, driving back the evening chill. From his saddlebag, Gage pulled jerky dried apples and a tin of coffee. "Not quite the Boston supper you're used to," he said with a faint grin as he handed her a share. "My father and I lived simply," Rose replied, accepting the plain meal with gratitude. "He was a literature professor, not a rich man." Gage's eyes lit with interest. "A professor's daughter that explains those books you fought to save?" She smiled, thinking of the volumes wrapped safely in her shawl. They were his treasures, Dickens, Austen, Shakespeare. He read to me every night when I was little. My schooling was different, Gage said without a trace of embarrassment. Pa taught us what he could, and the rest we learned from the land. Both kinds of knowledge matter, Rose said thoughtfully. After a pause, she added, "Maybe you'd like to borrow one of the books sometime." In the firelight, she caught a spark of warmth in his blue eyes. "I'd like that, Miss Carver." "Rose," she corrected softly. "If I'm to call you Gage, you should call me Rose." He gave a small nod and smile. "Rose, then." They talked late into the night, firelight flickering, as she shared stories of Boston, and he spoke of ranch life, his love of horses, and how he could read the weather by the flight of birds. Beneath his rugged frame, she sensed a thoughtful, almost philosophical side that reminded her of her father. When a yawn finally escaped her, Gage stood and unrolled her bedding near the fire. He draped his own blanket over it, ignoring her protests. "I've slept under colder stars with less," he assured, moving to the opposite side of the flames. "Rest easy, Rose. We've a full day's ride tomorrow." Settling under the blanket, she whispered, "Thank you, not just for saving me, but for all of this." Gage looked up, meeting her eyes across the glowing coals. "Get some sleep," he said gently. "I'll keep watch." And somehow, despite the strange wilderness sounds and the dull throb in her ankle, Rose slept more peacefully than she had in months, sure that Gage Hollis would keep her safe. Dawn broke to a chorus of meadowlarks and the quiet rustle of Gage already stirring. Rose opened her eyes to the smell of fresh coffee and saw him returning from the creek, hair-damp face bright and normal. "Morning," Gage Hollis said warmly, pouring steaming coffee into a tin cup and handing it to Rose Carver. "How's that ankle holding up?" Rose flexed her foot with care and winced. "Better, I think, still tender, though. We'll wrap it before we head out," Gage assured her. "Drink this, nothing fancy, but it'll wake you." The coffee was dark and strong, nothing like the carefully brewed cups she'd once had back in Boston. Yet Rose found the rugged flavor bracing like the raw beauty of the country itself. While she sipped, Gage worked with quiet efficiency, breaking down their camp. When she tried to help, he motioned her back with a small wave. "Rest that ankle. There'll be plenty of time to pull your share once we reach town." The easy remark, hinting at more shared days ahead, sent a quick flutter through her chest. She watched him saddle the horse with the fluid assurance of a man born to the range. "What made you choose teaching?" he asked over his shoulder. "I've always loved learning," Rose said, surprised by the question. "After my mother passed, I helped my father with his students. It just felt natural." Gage nodded, thoughtful. "We need teachers out here. Too many kids growing up without proper schooling." He tightened the last strap. "My youngest brother Jack, smart as they come, devours every book he can find. Could have been a doctor or lawyer if he'd had the chance." "Perhaps it isn't too late," Rose offered. "How old is he?" 17, Gage replied with a small smile. "But try convincing him there's more to life than horses and cattle." Before she could answer, he approached with strips of cloth torn from one of his spare shirts. "Let's get that ankle wrapped." Kneeling before her, he gently lifted her injured foot. His touch was steady, yet careful, as he bound the joint snug but not too tight. "Thank you, Rose," murmured, breath catching, when their eyes met, and lingered until Gage cleared his throat and stood offering his hand. Ready to ride. The journey toward Willow Creek unfolded much as the previous day, Rose seated in front of Gage on the saddle. Yet something subtle had changed. Their words came easier, and the silences felt natural, like pauses in a long conversation meant to last. Gage pointed out landmarks and shared bits of history about the country he loved. "There's nothing like Montana," he said, as they topped a rise overlooking a wide valley. I've seen Denver, even Chicago once, but nothing compares. Rose gazed at the endless sweep of prairie rolling toward mountain peaks that kissed the sky. It's magnificent, she breathed. It can be overwhelming, Gage admitted. Some folks feel too small in all that open space. Others find freedom in it. She turned slightly, meeting his storm-blue eyes against his sun-browned skin. And you, I can't imagine being anywhere else, he said simply. By mid-afternoon, they spotted the first signs of settlement, fenced pastures, distant cattle, then the scattered buildings of Willow Creek. Rose felt a strange mix of relief and regret. She was about to begin the life she'd planned, yet it meant parting with the man who had so suddenly become part of it. That's the school, Gage said, pointing to a sturdy plain structure at the edge of town. Teachers' quarters in back. You know it well, Rose observed. Gage chuckled, the sound deep against her back. Spent plenty of hours there as a boy, mostly unwilling ones. Old Mrs. Harrington ruled with an iron hand and a yardstick to match. The image of a younger Gage squirming under a strict schoolmarm's glare made Rose smile. Were you a troublemaker, Mr. Hollis? Let's just say I preferred the outdoors to arithmetic, he said with a grin she could hear. As they rode in, curious eyes followed them. Willow Creek was small. Strangers never arrived unnoticed, especially not sharing a saddle with Gage Hollis. Don't mind the stares, he murmured near her ear. Out here gossip travels faster than the stagecoach. Their first stop was the general store. Gage helped her down with deliberate care. Inside, a round man with kind eyes bustled forward, then paused at the sight of Rose. Well, now, who might this be? Zeke. Meet Miss Rose Carver, our new schoolteacher, Gage said. Miss Carver, this is Zeke Porter, who runs this place and keeps track of everyone's business. A pleasure, Miss Carver, Zeke said, pumping her hand enthusiastically. We've been waiting for you. The young ones have been running wild without lessons these past months. She had a rough go on the trail, Gage explained. Wagon tipped about a day east. I found her pinned beneath it. Zeke's eyes widened. Good heavens, are you hurt, Miss Carver? Just a sprained ankle, Rose assured him, thanks to Mr. Hollis arriving when he did. Most of what I own is still out with the wreck, Rose Carver admitted. I'll send some of our ranch hands at first light to haul back whatever can be saved, Gage Hollis promised. In the meantime, Miss Carver will need a few basics to start off, he told Zeke Porter. Zeke bustled around the store, piling up bedding lamps, cookware, and sacks of staples, while neighbors kept drifting in with flimsy reasons to shop. Gage looked quietly amused at the steady stream of onlookers, introducing Rose to each with easy charm. Within the hour, she had shaken hands with Grant Boone, the town's mayor, the blacksmith, the doctor, and half a dozen others, each offering a warm, if curious, welcome. By the time Gage guided her toward the schoolhouse, the sun was slipping toward the horizon. The place was just as he'd described, plain but sturdy, with wide windows, and a simple living space attached one main room that doubled as kitchen and parlor, and a small bedroom beyond. A pot-bellied stove promised winter heat and a place to cook. It's perfect, Rose said honestly. After days of uncertainty, the thought of her own four walls filled her with relief. Gage carried in the supplies Zeke had packed his broad shoulders, seeming to fill the modest rooms. When the last bundle was inside, he lingered near the door, hat turning slowly in his hands. I should head back. It's a couple of hours to the ranch, and Pa will wonder what kept me. A pang of disappointment surprised her. Of course I've delayed you long enough. No, Gage said quickly. I was glad to be there when you needed a hand. For a beat they both hesitated, the easy trail talk suddenly gone. Will you? Rose began, just as he said I could. They both stopped and laughed, the tension easing. "Ladies first," Gage said, a smile warming his eyes. "I was only going to ask if you might stop by again, maybe borrow a book like we talked about." "I'd like that," he answered. "And I was about to offer to check in on you, make sure you're settling fine." "I'd appreciate it," she said softly. He settled his hat on his head. "Well then, Rose, I'll bid you good night." "Good night, Gage, and thank you for everything." He tipped his hat with a quiet grin and stepped out, leaving her alone in her new quarters with the strong sense that something in her life had shifted far beyond a mere change of address. The next days blurred with preparations for her first class. Folks stopped by with gifts, a jar of preserves, fresh bread, a hand-stitched quilt, staying to chat and to satisfy their curiosity about the new schoolteacher. Through these visits, Rose learned more of the Hollis ranch and the family behind it. The ranch was among the largest in the territory, known for fair dealing and fine cattle. Gage's father, Eli Briggs, was described as strict, but just a founding hand in many of the town's institutions. The 5 Hollis brothers townspeople said, with equal admiration and awe, were tireless workers, fiercely loyal to kin, and not men to shy from a fight. "Gage is the steady one," confided June Pike, the baker's wife, over tea. "Thinks before he acts, unlike that hot-headed older brother of his. That's why Eli sends him to handle business in town. He struck me as capable," Rose answered, aiming for casual, though June's knowing smile hinted she wasn't fooled. "He's a fine man," June said. "Not married either, though, not for lack of women hoping." Before Rose could frame a reply, a knock sounded. Opening the door, she found a young ranch hand holding the reins of a wagon piled high with her belongings. "Compliments of Mr. Hollis, ma'am," he said, touching his hat. "He sent us at first light to salvage what we could." Rose's heart warmed. "Please thank him for me," she said, directing where to set the trunks and boxes. After the men left, June helped her unpack, clucking over the damaged items and exclaiming at the books that had survived intact. "Such learning," she said, brushing a finger along the spine of a leather-bound Shakespeare. "These children are lucky to have a teacher like you." "I only hope I meet their expectations," Rose replied, arranging her father's volumes on a small shelf by the stove. That evening, another knock startled her. She opened the door to find Gage himself cleaner and less trail-worn than when they'd parted hat in hand. "Good evening, Rose," he said, his deep voice sending an unexpected flutter through her chest. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," she said, stepping aside. "I was just putting away the things your men brought this morning. Thank you for sending them." Gage entered his eyes, taking in the cozy room. "You've already made this place feel like home," he said with a faint smile. "It doesn't take much," she answered, suddenly aware of every humble detail. "Would you like some tea? I was just about to brew a pot." While she set the kettle to boil, Gage moved toward the bookshelf, studying the titles with quiet interest. "Quite a library," Gage Hollis remarked, running a thumb along the spines of the books. "Your father must have had a wide-ranging mind. He believed in reading everything Rose Carver said, setting 2 cups on the small table. Philosophy, poetry, novels, history, each one opens a different window on the world." Gage carefully lifted a worn volume. "I've never read much Dickens," he admitted. "Most of my schooling came straight from hard work and the land." "You might start with that one," Rose suggested, nodding to the book in his hands. "David Copperfield, a boy carving his own path, finding where he belongs. I think you'd like it." Their fingers brushed as she passed him a cup of tea, a quick spark that surprised them both. "I'd be honored to borrow it," Gage said, placing the book aside with care. "If you can spare it." "Of course," Rose replied a little too quickly. "I've read it more times than I can count." They settled at the table, and for a moment Rose marveled at the quiet comfort of it, this man who days ago was a stranger now sipping tea in her home, as if he belonged there. "How's Willow Creek treating you?" Gage asked with a half-smile. "I bet the whole town's already quizzed you." Rose laughed. "Everyone has been kind, if more than a little curious. I've learned plenty about the town and about you and your kin, too." A faint color touched Gage's sun-browned cheeks. "Nothing too incriminating, I hope." "On the contrary," she teased. "You seem to be held in high regard." "Well, don't believe every tale," he said with a wry grin. "Out here, stories grow taller than the grass." They talked on trading news of ranch work and her plans for the school. When Gage finally rose, the lamplight had softened to a cozy glow. "I'd best let you rest," he said, taking up his hat and the borrowed novel. "Classes start soon, don't they?" "Monday," Rose confirmed as she walked him to the door. "I'd be lying if I said I wasn't nervous. I've taught before, but never a school of my own with such a wide range of ages." "You'll do just fine," Gage said with quiet conviction. "Those kids need someone who'll push them to think beyond this town. That's you, Rose." His confidence warmed her more than she cared to admit. "Thank you, Gage." At the threshold, he hesitated, eyes thoughtful. "There's a church social next Saturday. Simple gathering, music, dancing, some food. Would you let me escort you? Help introduce you around proper?" Her heart skipped. "I'd like that very much." The slow smile that spread across his face caught her breath. "Good. I'll come by around 6. After he left, Rose lingered at the doorway, watching his silhouette fade into the night, feeling a rush of anticipation she hadn't expected. She'd come west to start anew, to teach, not to fall into romance. Yet she found herself replaying every glance and word they'd shared. It was foolish, she told herself. They'd only known each other a handful of days, and she had a school to build and a reputation to guard. A handsome, steadfast cowboy was the last thing she should think about. And still, as she prepared for bed, she wondered what might grow between them. By Monday morning, the sky over Willow Creek shone an endless, flawless blue. Rose stood at the front of her classroom, nerves tight, as children filed in, faces ranging from shy curiosity to outright mischief. By 9:23, farm kids had settled at the desks, scrubbed clean, and dressed in their best. The youngest looked no more than 6. The oldest were nearly grown. "Good morning," Rose began, her voice steadier than she felt. "I'm Miss Carver, and I'm very pleased to meet each of you." A little girl in the front row raised a tentative hand. "Miss Carver, is it true a cowboy saved you from being squashed flat as a flapjack?" Soft laughter rippled through the room. Rose smiled. "It's true that Mr. Hollis helped me when my wagon overturned, but I assure you I wasn't quite that flat. My pa says Gage Hollis is the strongest man in the county," announced a freckled boy of about 10. "Says he once wrestled a bull with his bare hands." "That sounds impressive," Rose replied diplomatically. "Now perhaps we should—" "Are you sweet on him?" Another voice piped from the back, sparking a fresh wave of giggles. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but she kept her composure. "That's enough of that," she said firmly. "We're here to learn reading, writing, and arithmetic, not to gossip." To redirect their energy, she instructed, "Let's go around the room. Each of you stand, tell me your name, your age, and one thing you hope to learn this year." The tactic worked. Soon the room was filled with eager introductions and lessons underway, though Rose still caught the occasional curious glance and whispered aside about the cowboy who had lifted a wagon to save her life. It seemed Rose Carver's arrival alongside Gage Hollis had already stirred plenty of talk in Willow Creek, a fact that both embarrassed and secretly pleased her. The week that followed sped by in a whirl of lessons planning and discovering her students' personalities. Despite the wide span of ages and skill levels she had to cover, Rose found deep satisfaction in watching a child's face light with understanding, whether learning their letters or puzzling through tricky sums. By Friday afternoon, she felt she'd earned the trust of most of the class, though a few older boys still hung back, testing how firm her boundaries were. As she dismissed them for the weekend and reminded them of their reading, she spotted a familiar figure leaning against the fence. Gage straightened his easy smile, sending a flutter through her chest. "Afternoon, Miss Carver," he said, lifting his hat. "Thought I might walk you home if that suits you." "That would suit me fine," Rose replied, with a smile she couldn't hide, "though you realize you're giving the town gossips new material." Gage chuckled, offering his arm as they headed toward her quarters. "They've been buzzing since the day I brought you in. Might as well give 'em something worth the chatter." The teasing remark warmed her more than she expected. "The children have their own tales. Apparently you once wrestled a bull with your bare hands," she said. He laughed aloud. "Stories grow bigger every time they're told. Next thing they'll have me lifting your wagon with one finger while fending off a pack of wolves." "And how was your week?" Rose asked, aware of his steady presence beside her and the curious looks from folks they passed. Busy, Gage answered. "Getting ready for winter, making sure the cattle have enough feed and shelter. Found time to start that book, though." And Rose prodded, eager for his thoughts. "Not what I expected," he admitted. "Thought it might be slow, but it pulls you right in. That macabre fella reminds me of a drifter who passed through here last spring full of grand ideas, not a penny to his name." Their easy talk carried them to her doorstep. Gage hesitated. "I ought to head back to the ranch," he said, though he didn't move. "I'm looking forward to tomorrow evening," Rose offered softly. "So am I," he replied, eyes holding hers for a heartbeat, before he tipped his hat with a quiet smile and strode into the dusk. She watched until the night swallowed his tall frame, her heart beating with a mix of anticipation and nerves. Saturday dawned bright and crisp, the kind of autumn day made for celebration. Rose spent the morning on household chores, then took extra care with her appearance, choosing a deep blue wool dress that flattered her eyes and arranging her hair more elegantly than usual. At precisely 6, a knock sounded. When she opened the door, she caught her breath. Gage stood there, transformed from the trail-worn cowboy she'd first met. He wore a fresh white shirt, dark vest, and well-polished boots. His hair was neatly combed, and his jaw clean-shaven beneath the trim mustache. "Evening, Rose," he said, his gaze warming as it lingered on her. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she answered, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. "You clean up mighty well yourself." With a small smile, he offered his arm. "Shall we?" The church was only a short walk away, and music and laughter spilled from the open doors. Inside, pews had been pushed back for dancing. Tables of homemade food lined one wall, while a small band played lively tunes at the front. Their arrival quieted the room for a heartbeat before conversation swelled again, accompanied by curious glances and whispered remarks. Gage seemed unbothered, steering Rose easily through the crowd and introducing her to those she hadn't yet met. "Miss Carver, we're mighty glad you could join us," boomed Grant Boone, the mayor, giving her hand a hearty shake. "I see Hollis here is making sure you get properly acquainted with our town." "It's a pleasure to be here," Rose replied with genuine warmth. "Everyone has been so welcoming." "And how's school coming along?" the mayor asked. "My grandson Cole Briggs swears you're the strictest teacher he's ever had, which I call a fine compliment." As Rose assured him that Cole was a bright, promising student, she felt Gage's hand rest lightly at the small of her back, a touch both protective and quietly possessive that sent a ripple of awareness through her. The evening unfolded in a pleasant blur of music, laughter, and home-cooked treats with Rose, meeting more townsfolk, and feeling for the first time that she truly belonged in Willow Creek. Gage Hollis stayed close to Rose Carver, quietly pointing out names and kinships, so she could weave her way through Willow Creek's tangle of friendships and family ties. When the fiddles slid into a slow waltz, he turned to her with a questioning lift of his brow. "Would you care to dance, Miss Carver?" Rose hesitated for only a heartbeat. Dancing with Gage would all but confirm the town's speculation, whatever that might mean. But as she met his steady, inviting gaze, she found she didn't mind. "I'd be delighted, Mr. Hollis." He led her to the center of the room, taking her hand, while his other rested respectfully at her waist. As they moved to the music, Rose was surprised by his easy grace. "You dance beautifully," she said. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," Gage answered with a quiet smile. "She said no child of hers would ever stumble through a church social ranch work or not. She must have been a remarkable woman." "She was," he replied, a flicker of old sorrow shadowing his voice before he steered the talk elsewhere. "How are you finding teaching here? Must be different from Boston." "Very different," Rose admitted, as he guided her through a smooth turn. "But in good ways. The children are refreshingly direct and eager to learn, even if some try to hide it." "They're fortunate to have you," Gage said, his blue eyes holding hers. "This town needs someone who sees beyond its fences." The sincerity in his tone warmed her deeply. "Thank you for saying that." Their conversation flowed easily as they waltzed. Rose became keenly aware of the quiet strength in the arm that guided her, the faint scent of leather and soap, the gentle crinkle of his eyes when he smiled. When the music faded, he let go reluctantly, keeping one steadying hand at the small of her back as he steered her toward the refreshment table. "Thirsty?" he asked, but before she could answer, a stir at the doorway drew every gaze. A tall man stood there, his features so like Gage's, but harder, rougher. He swayed slightly, and Gage's posture tightened. "That's my brother Buck Crow," he murmured. "And by the look of him, he's had more whiskey than supper." Buck spotted them and strode over with a swagger that barely disguised his unsteady footing. "Well, if it isn't my little brother," he drawled loudly. "And this must be the new schoolteacher everyone's buzzing about." Gage stepped forward, subtly placing himself between Rose and his brother. "Didn't expect to see you here tonight, Buck. Bet you didn't." Buck shot back with a crooked grin. "Thought you'd have the pretty teacher all to yourself, huh?" He tipped an exaggerated bow toward Rose. "Buck Crow, ma'am, the good-looking Hollis brother. Pleased to meet you." "Mr. Crow," Rose said politely, though something in his manner put her on edge. Buck Gage warned, his voice low. "Let's talk outside." But Buck ignored him, eyes fixed on Rose. "So you're the one Gage dragged out from under a busted wagon. Mighty convenient timing, don't you think? He's been mooning around like a lovesick calf ever since." Rose felt heat rise to her face as nearby conversations died, every ear straining. "That's enough," Gage said sharply, gripping his brother's arm. "You're drunk. Let's get you home." Buck jerked free. "Don't tell me what to do, little brother. Just 'cause Pa thinks you walk on water doesn't mean the rest of us do." The tension between them was raw, old resentments crackling in Buck's slurred words and Gage's tight jaw. Rose stepped in, gently touching Gage's sleeve. "Perhaps we could all step outside for some fresh air," she suggested, her voice calm. "It's gotten rather warm in here." Gage met her eyes with gratitude while Buck barked a rough laugh. "She's got more sense than you, Gage. Fine, let's step out." Out in the cool night, the sharp air seemed to clear Buck's head. He leaned against the church wall, studying them with a steadier gaze. "So, schoolteacher," he said, less belligerent now. "What do you think of our little town? I find it charming," Rose answered honestly. "Everyone has been very welcoming. I'll bet they have," Buck muttered. "Nothing folks like better than fresh gossip, and you two have given 'em plenty." Straightening, he looked squarely at Gage. "Pa's wondering why you've been in town so much. I told him you were helping the new teacher settle in, but he ain't blind." Gage's jaw tightened. "My business in town is my own buck." Sure it is, Buck said with an easy shrug. Just like when you talked Pa into sending me to the north pasture so you could be the one to ride for supplies. Pretty convenient finding the school marm stranded out on the trail. It wasn't like that, Gage began, but Buck waved him off. Save it! I didn't come to fight. Just wanted to see what all the fuss was about. His gaze shifted back to Rose, surprisingly clear. Be careful with my brother, Miss Carver. He may look steady as bedrock, but Hollis men have a way of breaking hearts. Just ask our mother if she were still here to tell it. With that, he pushed off from the wall and walked away, his steps sure, despite the liquor. A heavy silence followed. Rose could see hurt and anger warring in Gage's face, his hands knotted tight. I'm sorry you had to see that, he said, at last, his voice rough. Buck and I. It's complicated. Families often are, Rose said softly, wishing she could ease the weight he carried. Gage raked a hand through his hair, loosening the neat comb. Would you mind if we didn't go back inside? I'm not in the mood for more small talk tonight. Of course, Rose Carver answered without hesitation. A walk sounds nice. Gage Hollis offered his arm again with quiet gratitude, and together they strolled down Willow Creek's main street, now hushed under a blanket of starlit sky. They walked in companionable silence until they reached the edge of town. Buck wasn't always like that, Gage said, at last his voice low. When we were kids, he was the one I admired, fearless, full of mischief, always ready for the next adventure. What changed? Rose asked gently. A lot, he said with a heavy breath. The war, for one. Buck enlisted at 18 and came back a different man. Then Ma died while he was gone. And me, I grew up, took on more of the ranch work, handled the business side. Pa began to lean on me. Buck's never forgiven that shift. That must have been hard on both of you, Rose said softly. Losing your mother so young, then having the family roles turned upside down. It was, and still is, Gage admitted. He looked at her, the hard edges of his expression easing. I'm sorry for spoiling your evening. You haven't spoiled anything, Rose assured him. I'm enjoying the walk. And she truly was. Despite Buck's disruptive arrival, there was a quiet peace in wandering through the sleeping town, with Gage, the stars blazing brighter than she had ever seen back east. They reached a small bridge arching over the creek that gave the town its name. Gage stopped, resting an elbow on the railing. May I ask you something, Rose? Of course. She joined him at the rail, the soft rush of water below mixing with the night air. Why did you really come west? You could have found a teaching post in Boston. A trip like this isn't easy for a woman alone. Rose considered, knowing instinctively that he deserved the truth. After my father died, there was nothing to keep me. We had to sell the house and most of our belongings to pay his debts. I could have found work there, yes, but every corner of that city was heavy with memories. When I saw the notice for a schoolteacher here in Montana Territory, it felt like Providence, a chance to begin again. And has it been what you hoped? Gage asked quietly. It's been more than I dared hope, she admitted, surprised by the depth of her own answer. I never expected to find such kindness here, such connection. The word lingered between them, full of unspoken meaning. Slowly, Gage reached out, brushing a stray curl from her face with a gentle touch. I'm glad you came, he said simply. Something within her shifted, a barrier giving way. Almost without thinking, Rose leaned closer, drawn to him, as surely as the tide is drawn to the moon. Gage hesitated only a breath before lowering his head to hers. The kiss was soft at first, questioning, then deepened as Rose responded, her palms resting against his chest. His arms slid around her waist, pulling her close. For a moment there was only the quiet of the creek, the night sky, and the warmth of his embrace. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers, breathing a little unevenly. I've wanted to do that since the day I found you on the trail, he confessed. Even when I was covered in dust and barely conscious, she teased, her heart pounding. Even then, he said, with a faint smile, "There's something about you, Rose Carver. Something I recognized the moment I saw you, though. I can't explain it." She understood. From that first dramatic meeting, there had been an ease between them, a sense of knowing that defied reason. "What happens now?" she asked softly, reality nudging at the magic of the moment. "People already gossip about us. Your brother clearly disapproves. And I have my position to consider. The school board might not look kindly on the teacher keeping company with a rancher so soon." Gage tucked her hand into the crook of his arm as they turned back toward her house. "Folks will talk no matter what we do," he said steadily. "As for Buck, his opinion isn't the one that counts. And the school board would be foolish to lose a teacher like you over something so small." "You sound very sure," Rose said half in wonder. "About some things, yes," he replied, his voice rich with quiet conviction. "About us, Rose, I'm sure as the sunrise." The certainty in his words thrilled and unnerved her. In little more than a week, her life had been upended, new town, new calling, and now this powerful bond that felt as if it had always been waiting for her. The cautious, practical side of her whispered it was too soon, yet her heart told her otherwise. At her doorstep, Gage took both her hands in his, the moonlight turning his eyes the color of stormy skies. "I'd like to court you properly, Rose Carver, if you'll allow it." The earnest, old-fashioned request touched her deeply. "I'd like that very much, Gage Hollis," she said softly. He smiled and lifted her hand to his lips. "Then I'll call on you tomorrow if that suits. Maybe we can ride out to the ranch. I'd like you to see it and meet my father." The idea stirred both excitement and nerves, but Rose nodded. "I'd like that." With one last gentle kiss, Gage bid her good night, waiting until she was safely inside before heading off. Leaning against the closed door, Rose touched her lips still warm from his kiss. Whatever she'd imagined when leaving Boston, it hadn't included this, a man who had literally lifted a wagon to save her life, and now seemed to lift her very heart with his presence. For the first time since her father's passing, Rose Carver felt a deep, steady hope for the days ahead. True to his promise, Gage Hollis arrived the next afternoon, guiding a smart buggy drawn by a perfectly matched pair of gray horses. "Figured we'd travel in a bit more style today," he said with a grin as he helped Rose up to the seat. The buggy rolled smoother than the rough trail they'd first traveled together. The day was made for an outing sunny, yet touched by the crisp edge of coming winter. As they crossed the wide, rolling country, Gage pointed out landmarks and shared bits of frontier history, his voice carrying both pride and affection for the land he called home. "There it is," he said at last, nodding toward a cluster of buildings that came into view. "Hollis Ranch." Rose caught her breath at the sight. The main house was a solid two-story structure of hewn timber, its broad porch wrapping around like an open embrace. Nearby stood a massive barn, a long bunkhouse, and other outbuildings kept in impeccable order. Corrals held spirited horses in training, and farther out cattle grazed across amber pastures that seemed to meet the sky. "It's beautiful," Rose said sincerely. "Your father has built something remarkable here." "We all have," Gage replied, quiet pride threading his words. "Every one of us has a hand in it." He brought the buggy to a stop before the porch. "Ready to meet my father?" Rose nodded, despite a flutter of nerves. Gage steadied her as she stepped down, his hand lingering at her waist just long enough to reassure her. The front door swung open to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man with dark hair streaked in silver and the same striking blue eyes as Gage. Eli Briggs bore the weathered look of decades spent in the open air, yet his clothes were neat, and his posture strong. "So this is the schoolteacher I've been hearing about," he said, in a deep, steady voice. "Welcome to Hollis Ranch, Miss Carver." "Thank you for having me," Mr. Briggs Rose replied, extending her hand. "Your son has told me much about your family's achievements here." Eli's handshake was firm, but not overbearing. As he now surprising, considering how little time he's spent at the ranch this past week. The words might have carried reproach, but a hint of humor flickered in his eyes as he glanced at his son. Figured it was time she saw the place. Gage said easily, "Where's everyone else?" "Your brothers are checking the north herd," Eli answered. "Buck mentioned he ran into you at the social last night." A fleeting shadow crossed Gage's face. He did. Something unspoken passed between father and son, but then Eli turned back to Rose, his features softening. "Come inside, Miss Carver. Hattie Briggs has tea waiting, and I expect you'd like to rest after the drive." Inside the house surprised Rose with its refined touches, well-crafted furniture, and gentle reminders of the woman who had once guided this home. Eli led them to a bright sitting room where Hattie the housekeeper had arranged a generous spread of tea and fresh-baked treats. Over the refreshments, Eli asked about Rose's background, her teaching work, and her early impressions of Willow Creek. His questions were frank, but never prying, and Rose soon relaxed, sensing in him the same steady honesty she admired in Gage. "Gage tells me you're quite the scholar," Eli remarked, accepting another cup of tea from Hattie. "Says you brought along a library that could put our towns to shame." Rose smiled. "Hardly that, just a few volumes that were special to my father. He believed books could stretch a person's vision." "A wise belief," Eli said with approval. "Too many folks out here never look past their own fences. The children will be lucky to have someone urging them to think bigger." After tea, Gage suggested showing her around the ranch. Together they walked the grounds while he pointed out the improvements he'd made: a new horse breeding program, irrigation ditches that kept hayfields lush, and a redesigned corral to gentle young stock more safely. "You've put a lot of thought into this place," Rose observed as they paused by a paddock where lively colts kicked up golden dust. "It's more than land and cattle to me," Gage said, leaning on the fence rail. "It's a legacy, something worth building and protecting." He glanced at her. "Does that sound foolish?" "Not at all," Rose answered. "It's admirable to care so deeply and to plan for the future." Gage's fingers found hers and held them warmly. "My father likes you," he said, with a small smile. "He doesn't show it much, but I can tell." "I like him too," Rose replied, with equal honesty. "I see where you get your sense of purpose." They continued the tour until they reached a hilltop that opened to a sweeping view of the entire ranch. In the late afternoon sun, the land below glowed in deep gold and amber, stretching on toward distant blue mountains. "This is my favorite spot on the whole place," Gage said quietly, helping Rose to sit on a fallen log so they could take in the breathtaking panorama side by side. "I ride up here to think," Gage Hollis said quietly. "Helps me remember what matters." I can see why Rose Carver replied, letting her gaze sweep over the endless land glowing beneath the late sun. "It puts everything in perspective." Gage sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. "Rose." His voice held an unusual hesitation. "We haven't known each other long, by most folks' reckoning far too short a time for what I'm about to say." Her heart skipped. "And what is it you're feeling, Gage?" He turned to her, his storm blue eyes open and unguarded. "That I've found something I wasn't even looking for. Someone. Out here in the middle of nowhere, I found exactly where I'm meant to be." Taking her hands, he went on. "It may seem sudden, maybe even reckless, but I've never been more certain of anything." The depth of feeling in his eyes made Rose's breath catch. "I feel it too," she said softly. Logic be damned, Gage murmured with a faint, wry smile. Some truths don't fit inside neat explanations, they just are. As the sun slid toward the horizon, casting long amber shadows across the ranch below, he drew her into his arms. Their kiss this time was deeper, surer, rich with promise and the quiet certainty of belonging. When they finally parted, Rose knew with unshakable clarity that her life was now bound to this man and this land. The weeks that followed fell into a steady, joyful rhythm. Rose taught through bright autumn days, winning over even the most stubborn students with her mix of high standards and genuine care. Whenever ranch work allowed, Gage rode into town sometimes for a simple supper and talk by the fire, other times to take her on rides through hidden valleys or to a neighbor's barn dance. What began as gossip soon turned to friendly teasing, and before long the people of Willow Creek welcomed her, not just as the schoolteacher, but as Gage Hollis's chosen partner, a standing that opened doors and forged easy friendships. October melted into November, bringing the first heavy snow and the hard chores of winter. Gage's visits grew less frequent as duties on the ranch multiplied, but each meeting felt all the sweeter. Rose poured her spare hours into preparing the school's Christmas pageant, eager to give her pupils a memory to treasure. It was during the final rehearsal, only days before the performance, that disaster struck. Rose lingered late in the schoolhouse, stitching last-minute costume hems and setting the stage. The temperature plunged through the afternoon, and by nightfall a full blizzard roared across the prairie. Judging it too dangerous to make the short walk home, she resolved to stay the night. She built up the fire in the cast-iron stove, spread spare blankets on the floor, and settled in to wait out the storm. At some point, she drifted into an uneasy sleep until a sharp crash jolted her awake. Flames licked hungrily up the wall near the stove. In her fatigue, she had stoked the fire too high. A spark must have leapt to the dry wood. Rose sprang up, snatching the water bucket kept for emergencies and flinging its contents onto the blaze. The flames hissed, but only leapt higher, feeding on the aged timbers. Smoke thickened, stinging her eyes and burning her throat. Realizing she couldn't fight it alone, she turned for the door, only to find it cut off by fast-spreading fire. Coughing hard, she backed into the farthest corner, mind racing for another escape. The windows offered a way out, but beyond them howled a deadly storm. If the fire didn't claim her, the blizzard might. Just as despair closed in, a pounding of fists rose above the roar of wind and flame, followed by a voice she knew at once. "Rose, can you hear me? Rose, it's Gage. I'm here," she shouted hoarsely through the smoke. "The fire, it's too fast." The door crashed open with a burst of snow and frigid air. Through the haze, she saw Gage, a wet blanket held like a shield, as he dropped to a crouch. "Stay low," he commanded, pushing through the smoke, until he reached her. He wrapped the damp blanket around her and pulled her close. "Keep your face covered," he ordered, lifting her into his arms. "Hold on to me." Rose pressed her face to his chest, feeling the strong, rapid beat of his heart as he carried her through the choking heat. Burning rafters cracked and fell, but he moved with fierce determination, shielding her body with his own. They burst into the howling night, the shock of cold air biting after the searing heat. Behind them, the schoolhouse blazed like a giant torch despite the driving snow. "My horse is near Gage," said his voice raw from smoke. "Can you ride?" Yes, Rose managed, though she trembled from exhaustion. He steadied her on her feet and guided her through the swirling snow to where his horse stamped and tossed its head. With swift, practiced strength, he lifted her into the saddle, then swung up behind his arm firm around her waist as he gathered the reins. "My quarters are closer," Rose gasped, thinking of the short route home. Too dangerous, Gage said, his breath sharp. The fire could spread in this wind. We need safer ground. He urged the horse forward into the blizzard. Rose buried herself against him, surrendering to his sure instincts as he guided them through the white fury, leaving the burning schoolhouse behind. She fought to stay awake, forcing each breath past the sting of smoke and the bite of bitter cold. At last, though it felt like hours, Gage Hollis reined in at a small cabin on the edge of town. He swung down and caught Rose Carver in his arms, carrying her through the swirling snow. An old lineman's cabin, he explained briefly, kicking the door open. Inside was a single sturdy room with a stove, a rough table and chairs, and a narrow bed. He set her gently on the edge of the mattress, then went straight to work, kindling a fire from the stacked wood inside. "Are you hurt?" he asked, as the stove crackled to life, throwing quick dancing light. "No," Rose said, though every breath scraped her throat and set her chest aching. "Just smoke. You came just in time." Gage knelt in front of her, taking her soot-stained hands in his calloused ones. "When I saw the glow of fire from the ridge." He broke off emotion, roughening his voice. "I thought I might lose you. How did you even know I was there? I was riding in to check on you, before the storm got worse," he said. Nearly turned back. "Thank heaven I didn't." As the cabin warmed, he helped her peel off her wet, smoke-scented coat and found a spare blanket in a trunk, wrapping it snugly around her shoulders. Then he melted snow for water and pressed a warm cup into her trembling hands. The schoolhouse. Rose whispered suddenly, the reality striking her like a blow. "All those books, the children's costumes." "Don't think on that now," Gage said gently. "What matters is that you're safe." Still tears welled. "I've failed them. The children were so excited for the pageant, and the town trusted me with their school." Gage sat beside her, drawing her close. "Listen to me, Rose Carver. You haven't failed anyone. A building can be raised again, books can be replaced. But there's only one you." His steady gaze left her breathless. Then, with sudden quiet certainty, he said, "I love you. I think I loved you from the moment I found you trapped beneath that wagon, maybe even before, if such things can be." Despite the night's terror, joy surged through her. "I love you too," she whispered, the truth ringing through her like a bell. His kiss was tender, a promise of life, and all that lay ahead. When he drew back, their foreheads rested together, breaths mingling. "Marry me," he said softly. "Not someday soon. I don't want to spend another day without you as my wife." Any other time she might have hesitated, but the fire and blizzard had burned away every layer of doubt. "Yes," she said, heart full. "Yes, I'll marry you." They passed the night in the cabin, the storm raging, while they talked of dreams and plans. By morning, the blizzard had spent itself, leaving the world white and hushed. When they rode back to town, they found the schoolhouse a blackened shell, but the rest of Willow Creek untouched, thanks to the heavy snow that smothered the flames. News of Rose's narrow escape and Gage's daring rescue spread fast, as did word of their engagement. Grant Boone, the mayor, called a town meeting that very day. "We'll rebuild," he declared firmly. "Bigger and better than before. But until then, we need a place for lessons. The meeting room at Hollis Ranch will do." Gage offered his arm protectively around Rose. "It's warm and roomy, and I can arrange rides for the children." The townsfolk agreed, and within days Rose had her temporary classroom set up at the ranch. What began as necessity turned into opportunity. The children learned not only reading and sums, but also ranch skills, horse care, winter feeding, and the rhythms of the land folded into their lessons. Even Eli Briggs, initially wary of the bustle, warmed to the change, delighting the students with tales of the first settlers. And Buck Crow, after a stretch of brooding silence, surprised everyone by teaching the older boys how to gentle horses. Christmas arrived with a simple but heartfelt celebration at the ranch, taking the place of the lost pageant. January's deep freeze followed, yet steady hands from the whole town raised the frame of a new schoolhouse. Through all of it, Rose and Gage's love only deepened. They were married on a brilliant February morning in the freshly built church. The entire town gathered to witness it. Rose wore an ivory silk gown Gage had sent for from Denver and carried a bouquet of rare winter hothouse flowers. Worth every mile and every penny, he whispered as she marveled at the gift. "You deserve beautiful things, Mrs. Hollis." The new name filled her eyes with happy tears. "I already have everything beautiful I could want," she said, looking at the man who had lifted far more than a wagon from her shoulders. With spring came fresh green pastures, the finished schoolhouse, and a different kind of beginning. The morning queasiness that had lingered for weeks was confirmed by the town doctor as the first sign of impending motherhood, another blessing in the life Rose and Gage were building together. A baby. Gage Hollis breathed when Rose Carver shared the news, wonder lighting his face. "Our child." He pulled her into a gentle embrace, careful of her, as joy surged through him. "Are you happy?" he asked, searching her eyes. "Happier than I ever dreamed," Rose said, resting a hand over the still, flat curve of her stomach. "When I came west, I wanted a fresh start, a place to mend after loss. I never imagined I'd find a home, a family, a love like this." Gage covered her hand with his own, his smile soft and certain. "And all because a wagon overturned on a lonely trail." "No," Rose corrected with a quiet laugh. "All because you were strong enough to lift it." 5 years later, Rose stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching as Gage guided their son in his first solo ride on a sturdy pony. The boy, named Eli for his grandfather, had Gage's blue eyes and Rose's quick, curious mind. At 4, he already showed a thoughtful streak and a love for the open land that promised the man he would become. Beside Rose, 2-year-old Margaret toddled on sturdy legs, clutching her mother's skirt and squealing with delight at every turn of her brother's pony. Before long, she too would be riding the pastures that were her heritage. The Hollis Ranch thrived under Gage's steady leadership as his father gradually stepped back. The original house had grown to fit the expanding family, and Gage's careful breeding program made Hollis horses sought after across the territory. Rose continued to teach at the new schoolhouse, dividing her days between lessons and the lively rhythms of home. Families moved to Willow Creek for the sake of her classroom, eager for the high standards and warmth she was known for. Buck Crow, once restless, had found his own niche as a successful horse trader, whose work complemented the ranch instead of competing with it. Gage's younger brothers married and settled nearby, weaving a wide, close-knit family circle. As the sun sank behind the mountains, spilling brilliant oranges and pinks across the sky, Gage walked back from the corral with Margaret in his arms and pride in his eyes. "Another good ride," he said, smiling at Rose. "Eli's a natural, just like his mama." Rose laughed at the teasing. "I think you mean just like his papa. I was terrified of horses when I first came here." And now Gage asked with a playful challenge, sliding his free arm around her waist. "Now I can't imagine life without them," she said softly, her glance sweeping over the ranch, their children, the life they'd built. "Or without any of this." Gage's expression gentled. He bent and kissed her, a gesture as familiar as breathing, yet still able to send a thrill through her. "Neither can I," he murmured. Best choice I ever made, stopping to help that woman trapped beneath a wagon. Rose smiled, eyes shining. Best choice I ever made, letting a handsome cowboy rescue me. Together, they stood watching the sunset, their children safe in their embrace. Rose's heart full as she thought of the road that had led here. From the sorrow of losing her parents to the daring of leaving Boston. From a broken wagon to the sure shelter of Gage's arms, every twist, even the painful ones, had carried her to where she truly belonged. In Gage Hollis, she had found not only a husband, but a true partner, one who matched her strength, challenged her to grow, and stood steady through every storm. In Willow Creek, she had discovered not just work, but purpose, a community that welcomed her as family. And in the wild, sweeping beauty of Montana territory, Rose Carver Hollis had found not merely a place to live, but a permanent home for her heart. Fateful. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blazed the trail. Subscribe, share, leave your thoughts in the comments, and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you.